Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1956 biblical epic, The Ten Commandments. Now, before I get around to share more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Dark Metal Spider for requesting this review, and if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, The Ten Commandments is a film that is widely considered to be one of, if not the best Bible films out there. It's also a movie that is considered to be one of the best films of the decade that it was released in. It's also on a lot of best of lists for film, period. And it's also one of the most financially successful motion pictures ever made, despite its gargantuan budget for the time. So, because of those reasons and many more, it's understandable that this film has a considerable following and a lot of people who really like it. But I was never really able to get into this movie. Even as a child, even as a kid, when I saw it on VHS, I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought it was boring. I thought it was too long. I felt that, yeah, there were some good things about it. Like I liked the parting the Red Sea sequence, and there were other things that even as a kid I was able to appreciate. But the sense of wonder, the sense of grandeur, the immersion that other people have mentioned when it comes to this movie, especially when it comes to watching it at a young age, I didn't really experience with this film. But I will say this, after watching the film and revisiting it again as an adult after all these years, I do appreciate it more. And there's certain elements of it that I would say that I'm a bigger fan of now. And I would say that it's a time waster for me. Like I could put this on and enjoy it for the size and scope of it and the spectacle and other bits and pieces that I actually like about the movie, but it's not a grand masterwork for me personally. It's not one of my favorite films. It's not a movie I would watch over and over again, and it's definitely not a film that I would honestly watch again anytime soon. But I would say that I thought it was okay, and I know for some people that probably is something that might be a bit controversial, but I'll explain why I feel that way soon enough. One thing that I don't think is just serviceable, though, is the direction by Cecil B. DeMille. I mean, there are some moments where the direction is a bit flat because it's a bit too stagey in terms of the way that scenes are framed and set up, especially dialogue sequences. They very much have this look and feel and vibe of a stage play, and at times that works out all right, but there's other times where it sticks out a little bit too much, especially compared to the other shots in the film, which are very cinematic and have this massive scope to them. But those sequences aren't really in the film a lot. A lot of the movie is just absolutely outstanding when it comes to its visual style and flair and the dynamic direction by Cecil B. DeMille in what would ultimately become his swan song, his final film before his death. I just find the various different sequences that take place in Egypt that establish the setting and showcase the various different props and the sets are just absolutely breathtaking. And so are all the sequences that involve thousands of extras and just so much splendor and just crazy, wild uh, uh, production values. Like, it's a movie that definitely looks like it cost as much as it did. And there's just so many shots that are very sweeping in size and scope and just really impressive technically. And the way that Cecil B. DeMille also incorporated the state of the art visual effects into certain scenes, like the parting of the Red Sea, utilizing early blue screen effects as well as early rotoscoping, and the way that he was just able to create some really authentic shots for a film that in essence is really a fantasy was really something special. And even stuff like some of the plague sequences, like the hail that turns to fire, and it was just a really technically terrific film. And I can see why a lot of other filmmakers admire and appreciate this film because of that. I mean, even some of the sequences in the Passover scene, uh, those are also very, very strong, very good. Like the way that he worked with lighting, the way that he did a lot of showing and not telling in terms of showcasing uh, uh, death coming to people's doors. It was very creepy and atmospheric and moody. And even simple shots of Moses wandering throughout the desert were just epic. So I genuinely really like Cecil's direction for this film. And his direction is all the more impressive when you realize that he had a heart attack while shooting this movie. He had a near fatal heart attack. I think it was so bad that he actually collapsed on set. He was rushed to the hospital, and as soon as he was able to walk and recovered from his heart attack, he went out into the desert again and finished filming the Ten Commandments. His doctor said don't do it, but he did it anyway, and that might have shortened his life in the long run, but it just showcases his passion and his love for filmmaking and his commitment to the movie. And to me, you know, that's definitely something that is worthy of praise. The fact that the man had a heart attack and got back up and finished the movie. I got to give him major kudos for that. But I think his passion for the project, while for the most part, I think it's a strength, I think at times it does weaken the film, though, because he turns it into a vanity project. I wish the screenplay for this film was on the same pedestal as Cecil's direction, because I feel that is arguably the most inconsistent thing about this movie, other than some of the performances. The script by Aeneas Mackenzie, Jesse L. Lasky Jr., Jack Garrison, Frederick M. Frank. And here's the reason why I feel this film falters for me. It really comes down to the story. It really comes down to the script and how things are structured. I feel that there's way too many lines of dialogue that are very hokey, that are very cornball, kind of take me out of the film at times. And I also have never really been a big fan of the Exodus story. So already this script is stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's going to need a miracle to work for me, because I just don't like the Exodus story. I don't like how inconsistent it is when it comes to the morals. I don't like how it handles certain elements of the story. It's something that's always bugged me ever since I first read it in Sunday school. So other than, massive moments of wild spectacle, like the parting of the Red Sea and some of the plagues, there's really not a lot story-wise that really engages me. When Moses starts his journey of connecting with God and going on this mission to free the Hebrew slaves, and facing off against the Pharaoh in like the last hour and a half of the movie. Other than some of the sequences involving the visual effects, I just am not that engaged by the story. And I think it's because Moses as a character, the way that he's written in the second half of the story is just so one-dimensional. And I feel that there was a lot of potential wasted for some intriguing storytelling that was just dropped in favor of just doing a rote, typical retelling of Exodus. And what I mean by that is the writers, to give them a fair amount of credit, they actually did some extra research. They went above and beyond. They didn't just use the biblical texts for this script. They also found other texts that they could use to maybe fill in the blanks or to establish Moses as a character more when it comes to him prior to the events of Exodus, in terms of what happened before all of that. And I feel that's the strongest aspect of this script, is the parts that deal with Moses when he was adopted as a baby by an Egyptian woman and then raised in Egyptian society, and then in the process becoming ingratiated with and becoming a genuine part of the Pharaoh's family, to the point where the Pharaoh raises him as his own son. And as he grows older, he becomes more and more popular with Egyptians and other people in that society. He rises up the ranks when it comes to politics. He becomes the front runner, so to speak, for Pharaoh, even over Ramses. And so that creates a lot of divide between the two of them. And he's also madly in love with this woman and Nefertiti, who he hopes to be his queen, and she hopes that Moses will be her king, and he's using this opportunity and using this power not really in a way to corrupt others or to take advantage of people. He's actually using it for good. He's changing the way other Egyptians think about slaves, and making it more potentially acceptable to do things like provide slaves with free grain and provide them with a day off of work. And he also, in the process, though, he's not completely forgetting how to appease the Pharaoh and appease the whims of other people in Egypt's high society. So there is an argument to be had that if Moses became Pharaoh, he probably would have found a way to free the slaves, and would have found a way to, in the process, also maybe um, prevent countless loss of life, and prevent plagues from happening, and prevent all this other stuff that ultimately occurred later on in the story. And to me, I think that's a much more interesting place to take this story. And I know why I didn't do that. It's supposed to be an authentic retelling of the Bible story. But, that would be interesting to me. I think it would be interesting to see a what if script, a what if story that dealt with Moses, and what if he became Pharaoh? What if he actually did become Pharaoh of Egypt? How would he free the slaves that way? And how would he fend off Ramses and protect his new kingdom? I think that would be a really interesting place to take this story. But I think a lot of people would be afraid to do that because of the fact that it's a Bible story, so they don't want to offend anybody. But I still think it's worth exploring, because once Moses realizes his true nature and he realizes that he's the son of Hebrew slaves, the film starts to go downhill story-wise for me. Like, I like the scene where he's in the mud pits. I think that's a really moving, powerful scene, especially the sequence where he's tending to the wounded, dying old man. I thought that was a really strong scene that really showed Moses' character in a genuine, a good light. But once you get to some of these other subplots involving like uh, Joseph and Baca and Joseph's girlfriend and all of this other stuff, it just isn't as interesting to me. And then when Moses starts his journey and finds the burning bush and does all of that and becomes a shepherd and winds up back in Egypt after he was left for dead in the desert by Ramses because his true nature of being a Hebrew is revealed, and he's then ostracized and made an outcast in Egyptian society completely. It just isn't as interesting of a narrative to me. And then that's really where the most questionable aspects of the Exodus story come into play, which is Moses's hero origin and him casting aside his Egyptian roots and embracing his Hebrew roots fully and becoming a messenger of God and God's and in some ways God's warrior, using God's power to bend the Pharaoh's will to free the Hebrew slaves because he's the chosen one. He's the prophesied deliverer of God and his people. And I've always felt that the fact that God waited 400 years to free his people to be a bit sadistic. I'm just saying, like, I don't know why he waited 1 year, let alone 400. But he waits 400 years until he's finally like, all right, fine, that's enough suffering, that's enough torture for you guys. I'm gonna send a deliverer. His name is Moses. And then you have the whole stuff with the Pharaoh. And if you want to talk about sadistic, the God hardens the Pharaoh's heart, so he will be unquestionably stubborn when it comes to freeing the slaves. Instead of, I don't know, trying a little bit harder to convince the Pharaoh to free the slaves on his own volition, God just decides to harden his heart on purpose so he can have more of a reason to just cause all these plagues to happen and cause all this extra suffering and torment for not only a bunch of people in Egypt, but also his own people again, because it turns the water to blood. So now they don't have any water for 7 days. And, plunges the whole of Egypt into darkness. There's all this other stuff. And to me, it's just incredibly excessive. And it is. It's genuinely sadistic. And it gets worse because then you have the stuff with Passover where, because the Pharaoh, due to God's own actions, because he hardened his heart so much, the Pharaoh is like, that's it. I'm gonna order the death of all the firstborn children of Hebrew slaves. And because he orders that, then things get flipped, and now it's all the firstborn sons or the firstborn children of Egypt that are going to die. And I just find it all kinds of messed up that this is what God's plan was. It was like, oh, you said you were going to do this because I hardened your heart and made you choose to do this and go this far. Well, now joke's on you. Now your children, your firstborn are going to die now. And there's this whole I wouldn't say holiday, but there's this whole, in essence, kind of a celebration and Passover, which is basically what it is like, hey, we celebrate this day, we break our bread and we eat our bitter herbs because this is the day when God didn't kill you. God chose not to kill you. He killed all these other people, but he didn't kill you. I just, for a movie that's about the establishment and the end of the Ten Commandments that are made by God himself, and one of the Ten Commandments is thou shalt not kill, and God essentially kills countless people in this movie, and in this story of Exodus, it's very contradictory. It's just unbelievably questionable when it comes to the morals. And that's a problem that exists in multiple stories and multiple passages in the Old Testament for me. I mean, the stuff with there's this whole story that's pretty well known where this father killed his own son to appease God. The whole story of Job where God and the devil have a bet and they're messing around, and so God decides to just completely make this servant of his who's been loyal and been one of the best possible servants he could ever ask for in terms of his servitude to the Lord, and just makes him completely miserable and ruins his life, and then is all like, oh yeah, sorry about that. He doesn't even apologize. It's like he fixes it after a certain point, and then he just guilt trips the guy. He's like, well, you don't understand. You will never understand what I'm dealing with and what I have to do. No apology for completely screwing his life up and ruining everything and just torturing him for who knows however long. It was just like, it was almost like the equivalent of a Bible version of, do you even lift, bro? Like, so you have that. You have the whole reason for the flood, which was, I don't like the way that people talk, so I'm going to wipe out almost all of humanity because I just don't like the way that they are talking to one another. Like, so the Old Testament God, this might be a bit blasphemous, but I'm going to get it off my chest. The Old Testament God, he's a dick. He's a total douchebag. He's a sadistic asshole. Like the kind of sadist that even a Jigsaw from Saw would be like, whoa, man, that I kill people for fun and torture them with torture devices. And even I am not this messed up. I mean, there's even a bit in this script where Moses tries to ask his God for forgiveness to spare the Pharaoh's son. Out of, I don't know, out of just appreciation, respect for the fact that Moses does have an Egyptian part of his family, and the Pharaoh and his queen and Moses's former lover have suffered enough. They don't necessarily need another death to get the point across. Like, in some ways, I think that might make the Pharaoh turn to God more, if you think about it. Think about this. All these plagues are happening, everything's all occurring, and Moses does his thing, and he asks God to spare the Pharaoh's son, and the son is spared. All these other people die, all these other firstborn children die, but not the Pharaoh's son. And God speaks to him and calls to his heart and unhardens his heart, and Moses and the Pharaoh then come to a conclusion and realize that the right thing is to free the slaves. And the Pharaoh does it of his own volition because he sees the power of God and he sees the positive power of God. But that's not the point. The point of Exodus is to create a reason to fear God. That's really what Exodus is, if you break it down. It's a reason to fear God. He shows his power and his might, and a way to make people fear him, to see him as somebody that they should fear, not somebody that they should love, not somebody that they should appreciate on a more giving or generous or kind level. It's to fear him, because if you don't do what he asks, you will suffer dire consequences. And I just find that to be all kinds of questionable in so many different ways. And it just makes scenes like when the Pharaoh and his men get drowned by the ocean have a completely different connotation. And then you have the stuff with the golden calf, which the way that whole scene was written was just laughable to me. All of a sudden, just because of the fact that Moses, after he freed the slaves and did the part in the Red Sea and did all of this stuff, because God made Moses wait 40 days on a mountain, on a volcano, to eventually give him the word of God, the people understandably decided to turn to something else. It's been 40 days. They probably thought that Moses was dead. It's been 40 days. He's been on that mountain for 40 days. There's no way that somebody would have survived that on a volcano for 40 days. And yeah, there's people who are like, well, he was on the mountain before for a long time and he survived. This is Moses we're talking about. And Moses' people and God's people, they create this golden calf, and they do it because they probably just thought that Moses was dead. And so they're human. And so they realized they were looking at the situation and they were like, well, we're stuck here at the bottom of this mountain in the middle of nowhere. We are questioning our faith. We're questioning our connection to this God. We want to fill that void with something else, and creates the golden calf. God isn't happy about that. Moses finally comes down from the mountain, and yeah, they all had a party and they orgied and did whatever. Yeah, and they tried to sacrifice this one girl, and that's not cool. But at the same time, it just felt like something that was so... It was very forced too. Like, it just felt like it happened way too quickly. And also the fact that there's like 0 ounce of like, it's okay, you're human, you make mistakes. I shouldn't have sent Moses up on that mountain for 40 days. I should have given him the 10 Commandments right away. Just don't do that again. You know, instead of that, it's just no tolerance, 0 tolerance policy. You don't abide by the will of God, you will die. Like, that's an actual line of dialogue in this movie, in this script. And I'm like, that is just screwed up. And so, like, the ground opens up, swallows up like a bunch of people who previously were followers of God and followers of Moses, and they get killed. And then after all of that, you would think, okay, all right, they've been through... The Hebrew slaves, they've been through hell. Okay, now they're going to have some prosperity. Now they're going to have some, a bit of, I don't know, stability in their lives and on their new journey. And they're actually going to have real freedom. No, they're going to wander the desert for 40 years. For 40 years, they're going to wander the desert. And I'm like... This is just cruel. This is just not a good story. Like, if this was an original story, original script that was written, and it was inspired by Bible texts, but it wasn't actually from the Bible, do you really think so many people would be giving it a pass? I don't think so. Because there's a lot of problems with it that are mentioned in a ton of other reviews for other films that have very questionable morals, have issues with tone, have other problems when it comes to the narrative. And I just feel that this script and the story of Exodus is a prime example of something that has some interesting concepts, has some cool ideas, parting the Red Sea, but it's not executed very well. And I do feel that the main reason why this entire book exists, it's to solidify people's faith in God in a way that makes them fear God and fear his wrath in particular. And I think that's very manipulative. And it goes completely against this idea that God is loving and God cares for everybody and God's all about forgiveness. Not this God. This God is like, you only worship me. And if you don't worship me, I will smite you. I will open up the ground and I will let it swallow you whole, or I will drown you in the ocean. Like, it, I'll cause all these plagues. I'll do all this stuff, and it's just like, I think it's overkill. It really is. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of this script and this story, is because of the fact that it's the Exodus story. I've never been that into it. So, is it a good adaptation of Exodus? In some ways, yes. It leaves out some things. It kind of invents some things that weren't necessarily there or in the same context or in the same order. There's stuff that I feel should have been cut out. There's entire subplots that I don't really think add that much to the film or the story. Really would have helped the pacing, would have helped the story itself become more engaging. I think the cast for the most part is strong. I mean, Charlton Heston as Moses, I think he did a good job. There were times where he was a bit hammy when it comes to his acting, but for the most part, I think it was a pretty solid performance. It was a difficult role to pull off, and I think he did a good job handling the different nuances of the character the best that he could with what he had to work with in the script, which you see his best work early on in the film when he's just Moses with the gray beard and everything. Like, it's fine, but it just doesn't really seem like it's not a part of his performance in this film that I feel is as interesting or as compelling to watch. It feels like he's just playing a superhero, a Bible, which is what Moses is. He's a Bible hero. Yul Brynner, though, is Ramses. This is honestly, you could argue it might be the best performance of his career. Like, he was just stoic and imposing and intimidating and just commands the screen in every scene that he's in. Like, Yul Brynner was amazing in this film as Ramses. I mean, Charlton Heston even agreed. Like, Charlton Heston said that he was the best actor in the entire film, and honestly, I agree. And Baxter was fine as Nefertiti. It's not Nefertiti because apparently Cecil B. DeMille thought that too many people at the time would make too many titty jokes. I don't know why, but that's the reason why it's Nefertiti. But it was still, I still liked her performance, especially when she becomes a little more vindictive near the end. Adds a different layer to the performance. She was good femme fatale. Edward G. Robinson as Dathan. I mean, plays a good, conniving bad guy. He's always done that. So it was another good performance from him. Yvonne de Carlo as Sephora. I don't really think it was that good of a performance. I'm sorry. I don't mind her as an actress, but there were a lot of moments with her where the acting was just it was not great. John Derek was another one where his performance wasn't the best. Even Cecil B. DeMille felt that way. You also have Vincent Price as Baca, a little role, but he was fun to see him, play a little mustache twirling villain with a whip. You also have a John Carradine who plays Aaron. Yeah, Nina Foch as Bithia. Sir Cedric Hardwicke as the Pharaoh Seti. I thought that was a good performance by Sir Cedric Hardwicke as the Pharaoh. Debra Paget as Lilia. But yeah, for the most part, pretty good performances. Some were definitely better than others. And I think the worst performances were the ones where it was just overly theatrical. And I know that's the style of acting back then, but I've never been into that style. And I think in some ways, some of Yul Brynner's performance and some of Charlton Heston's performance and some of the other people in the film, their performances, those were also very theatrical. But it was theatrical acting done well, where some of the other actors and actresses in this film, it was theatrical acting done the wrong way, which makes the hokey dialogue even more hokey. Something that isn't hokey though is the cinematography by Loyal Griggs and the editing by Ann Bauschens and the just production design and art direction. I mean, the fact that they actually built real sets with real materials, towering sculptures, and it's a sight to behold. It genuinely is, and the costume design was unbelievable. Like it was so good, and the score by Elmer Bernstein was excellent. Like it really did give this film an epic feel to it that I don't really necessarily feel it would have on the same level without it. Um, it can get a bit repetitive at times, I will admit, but for the most part, I think the score, um, I wouldn't say is completely unique for the time, but it's a score that still holds up well to this day. Like it's a score that genuinely has a lot of strengths and power to it. The pacing of the film, I think, is a bit too sluggish. I really do. I think you could have trimmed an hour out of this movie and it would have been better. I think it would have been just as compelling. I think it would have been just as interesting, would have been just as exciting. But the film was a hit when it came out. It's still a hit with a lot of people today. So I'm kind of in the minority, and that's fine. And I'm totally fine with people who still really love and enjoy and admire this movie on a deeper level than I do. Um, but that's just my thoughts on the Ten Commandments. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.